Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second online engagement session for a land use redesignation application for Sarina Homes to rezone two mid-block properties on the 1600 block of 33rd Avenue Southwest in the community of Marteloup in Ward 8. My name is Jennifer Dobbin of Dobbin Consulting, and I am a land planning and public engagement consultant in Calgary. I will be moderating tonight's online session. The subject parcel for this engagement session is located at 1624 through 1640 33rd Avenue Southwest, encompassing 5 lots on the west end of the same block as the completed Cocoa building, also a Sarina Homes development. This application is specifically for the two mid-block properties of 1924 and 1928 and seeks to extend the approved zoning of MU1 F3.5 H20 from the western 3 lots onto the two mid-block properties. We note that this application is for land redesignation, and further public engagement will be conducted during the development permit application for the building design. The land use controls are, we are going to be discussing density and floor area ratio, height, which will include shadowing, setbacks and stepbacks, uses, parking, landscape requirements, amenity spaces, waste, and recycling. Additional engagement will occur during the development permit process and includes discussions about the building design and details regarding public realm interfaces and landscaping. I'd like to introduce our panel tonight. We have Nazim Virani, the president of Sarina Homes, and Max Parrish, Sarina's development manager, Tony Casola, partner at Casola Cop Architects, and Talisha Wagner, intern architect. We also have as attendees, Jared Friedman, the City of Calgary, file manager for this application, Mark Sagas, City of Calgary coordinator for community planning, Zev Kamachko from Councillor Woolley's Ward 8 office, and they can answer questions for you in the chat. I will now go over the agenda and review the housekeeping rules for this evening's engagement session. Currently, we have 9 attendees in the webinar besides the panel and myself. During this live session, you'll first hear from Tony Casola with Casola Cop Architects, who is going to present shadow studies, and then Max Parrish of Sarina Homes will review the application timeline. After these presentations, I will be moderating a Q&A session where attendees may ask questions of the panel. You will note that as an attendee, your video and audio are disabled. Please submit your questions to the panelists through the chat function. You can find the chat on the right-hand side of your screen by clicking on questions. You can submit your questions at any time. However, you may wish to wait until the end as the presentations can address some of your questions. During the question and answer period, we will group similar questions together by subject. The presentation slides will be provided to the public after this session, and any unanswered questions can be emailed to max.parrish@sarinahomes.ca. And a What We Heard report and recording of this engagement panel will be provided after the session with a chat transcript. I would now like to introduce Tony Casola of Casola Cop Architects.
Hello, everyone. I think you can hear me. Thanks, Jen. Thanks for everyone's time this evening. My name is Tony Casola, and I'm representing Casola Cop Architects. I'm just going to quickly go through and revisit the general project scope and vision for those that weren't part of the previous session that we had 3 weeks ago, and then quickly speak in more detail about some of the more prominent concerns and questions that we heard in the last session, namely related to massing, setbacks, and shadowing impact. So as Jen mentioned, this is an MU1 land use that we're seeking, and that'll allow for a proposed 125 unit 6-story residential building with 1.5 levels of underground parking. That effectively means that every unit will have a parking stall. The main floor of the building will contain larger grade-oriented 3-bedroom suites that can also function as live-work units. And the southwest corner of the main floor is effectively going to have some amenities, an indoor amenity for the residents, as well as, of course, the main lobby and entrance for the building. And that'll be on the 16th Street side. And as you go around the building towards the back and the lane side, we've managed to pull the building back in our proposal to allow for a really nice common outdoor amenity garden for the residents. And the massing proposed in our recent DP application is providing greater stepbacks than what the MU1 land use requires. Effectively, on all four sides, we're pulling the building's outermost edges back at least 2.3 to 3 meters. So that's about 8 to 10 feet, more than the minimum required. On the lane side, the center of the building's massing is further set back from the lane by an additional 9.6 meters. So that's about 13.4 meters back from the lane property line. And next slide, I guess. This view of the proposed massing shows the key setbacks, specifically how they affect the neighbors to the east and the north. Again, on most of the faces, proposed building is set back more than the allowable. As you can see here with the recessed north face of the lane, the majority of the building has reduced impact to the single family properties to the north. And also this view shows the uppermost level of the building, reduced footprint, which helps to minimize the shadowing effects, as we'll see in the shadow studies. This image right here with the yellow, those are highlighted areas that represent the area that is the increased setback area. And the profile of the proposed massing is the gray area. So we can see how, what we could build to with the MU1, but what we're actually proposing to build is set back so that we can minimize that shadow on the neighboring parcels. I think the next slide would probably get us to the shadows, Jen. Perfect. So at the last session, we said we'd take a closer look at the shadowing and how it would affect the neighboring sites. And earlier I spoke about how the proposed DP massing provides increased setbacks to kind of try to mitigate that shadowing to the neighbors, and has a reduced upper story to also help with that. The shadows shown to the right in purple here are just that. They're the DP massing as described. We can see here that in the spring and fall months, that is March and September, that the setting back of the building, especially along the north side, helps to pull the shadows back significantly so that only the southerly edges of the rear yards to the north are impacted. And these are typically areas that are occupied by garages along the lane and not really patio or deck areas that are typically closer to the rear of the single family homes. To give more context to the proposed shadowing, we added 2 additional comparison studies. That's what you're seeing with the blue shadow in the center. So that effectively shows, the impact, what the impact would be if the massing was pushed to the minimum bylaw setbacks, which is what the MU1 allows. There are recent examples in our loop of this approach where development looks to create an inward-looking courtyard solution, but in order to do that, it kind of has to push out to the periphery of its parcel, and this obviously increases the shadowing to the adjacent parcels to the north. So we're choosing to actually pull all of the massing, most of the massing of the building as far south as possible to try to mitigate that shadow impact to the north. The study to the left that's shown in pink, that effectively is just a sort of a what-if scale comparison between that of a lower profile development that would be represented by an RC2 3-story townhome development. Specifically, what we wanted to show is that even with a low profile development, the shadow impact to the neighboring Cocoa courtyard would be similar simply because a typical townhome would be built to within about 4 feet or 1.2 meters of the property line. So although it would be a shorter development, it would increase its shadow impact by simply being closer to its neighbor. Now, all of these studies show that achieving unobstructed solar access is always challenging in courtyard type developments. And Cocoa is an example with its narrow 8-meter courtyard that is effectively shadowed by its own massing to the south. Also, most of these shadowing impacts of the proposed massing is on the west face of the Cocoa building, which has several small windows, but no balconies or outdoor uses, albeit there are some in the courtyard that are immediately to the west side. If we can go to slide 6, that would be the June solstice. This represents basically shadows at the summer solstice, which effectively is like right now or this week. We can see here that it's only later in the afternoon that shadows begin to affect the most westerly section of the Cocoa courtyard. This month was also or the solstice was also included to show that during the outdoor use months, or the periods that people would spend most of their time outdoors, the shadowing impact is pretty minimal. And ultimately, just to kind of summarize the whole massing and shadowing, I mean, it's ultimately every new development has some degree of shadowing impact, that although you cannot realistically eliminate the shadows, we feel that we made significant adaptations to the massing to at least minimize them. I think that goes to the next slide, and I'm passing it off to Max. Thank you.
Daddy, gotta be quiet. Thanks very much, Tony. So I'm sure we have some attendees that were here a couple of weeks ago, and we may well have a couple of new ones. So I'll keep this fairly brief. This slide just shows our timeline of the project and all the engagement we have carried out. So Jennifer touched on the fact that we already had a land use rezoning approved for the adjacent 3 western parcels, which is shown on the left-hand side of the timeline here. So we had a lot of engagement with neighbors, with many of you who are attending today. So we went through quite a process there. And then with the acquisition of another parcel, we have extended that for what our project is now proposed to be with our application. So right now, it is the 1624 and 1628 rezoning that we're looking at. The land use is what we're engaging on today. So we have had, as shown on the right-hand side of the diagram, just from March 2021 is kind of where we pivoted a little bit on the proposed project and had pre-applications meeting with the city. And then we have our land use application. We've had other little engagements with yourselves and other stakeholders such as the city and CA. And that's shown the different tools we've used for that, the postcard drops, site signage, and website that I hope you're all aware of and have had a chance to visit. And then we did have the Calgary Planning Commission last week, which the land use rezoning passed through, which means on July 26, we will have the public hearing of council, which is an opportunity for neighbours as well to address council as this application is reviewed. And I think Jennifer touched on it as well. We will be having a development permit related, more design related engagement session post that hearing. So that is it for the timeline. Obviously, there can be more questions on this if needed, and I will hand back to Jennifer, please. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. If my panelists can turn their video and microphones on. I'm not sure what's happening on my end, but I understand that we can see and hear people, but I'm not showing the live view of everybody being visible on my end.
I think we're good, Jennifer.
There we go, Max.
Everybody. Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you. Okay, so we have one question that's come in so far. It's a 2-part question. They would like to know how the new building might impact the foundation of the Cocoa building. They have some concerns about construction. And then subsidence concern, I'm not quite sure what that means, but the second part of the question is they're also concerned about privacy with this new building being quite a bit taller than Cocoa. Max or Naz, would you like to address that?
So the first part, foundation-wise, between Naz and Tony, if you could address that if possible, please.
Sure. Tony, I think I'll pass that over to you with respect to, you know, what I think, what I understand the question to be is, you know, through the excavation process and perhaps through the building of the parkade, the proposed potential new parkade, will there be any risk or disruption to the Cocoa Foundation parkade? Do I understand that right, Jennifer?
Yes.
Okay.
The question is, yeah, will it specifically the subsidence concern? We can ask for clarity of that in the chat.
Yeah, for sure. So, in my experience with the buildings that we've done, You know, and this includes not just mid-rise, but also for some of the townhome projects that we've done. You know, we've had only one issue where we were building a townhome project, and there was a, you know, it was a really thin setback. I think it was 4 feet or something like that, and it was an old bungalow, and so that their setback was closer to 4 feet on the other side, so there wasn't a lot of space there. And so the way we were able to resolve that is through doing a proper shoring exercise where we did not slope cut. Hopefully, you know, we didn't cut on an angle. We had to cut directly down, and then we end up spraying concrete against the shoring wall to mitigate any, you know, sloping or sliding of any dirt or any, you know, issues with future foundations. So that was the one instance that we had there, and that's how we resolved it. Tony, maybe I'll defer to you in terms of our plan with the proposed building, because I think there's some more setback here. I think we're set back, you know, 8 or 10 feet or something like that.
Yeah, we're set back 3 meters. And I believe that lines up, Talisha, with the parkade wall, correct? And it's only where the stair bumps out is where we need to kind of project further, but that's an isolated part of the setback area. So for the most part, we have more than what is typical for an inner city foundation in terms of distance from the neighboring property. And because we're not going to be doing any pile driving, anything that, you know, has seismic issues, I don't think it's going to have any sort of sound ramifications to the neighbors, other than, of course, heavy machinery and that. But certainly not the kind of stuff you get from pile driving or big rigs or whatever, because we're basically going to be doing shotcrete for the most part.
Yeah, and shotcrete is it's just concrete spray, you know,
Right.
that
Sounds more violent than it.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's more like spraycrete rather than shotcrete. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's
basically
more
spraying concrete up against the wall to keep it all back instead of
yeah.
typical kind of,
Yeah.
pile and lagging.
So just to expand on that, just to where Tony was going is, so it looks like 3 meters, we have more of a setback, so 10 meters away from the property line, and then there's further setback to where the parkade sits on the Cocoa site. So I think in terms of distance, we're well protected there. Additionally, we are not expecting to do any pile driving with respect to putting beams in place. Rather, we will be cutting it, you know, with a deep cut, followed by spraying concrete on there to retain the wall. So it's a less invasive, I guess, approach to shoring a wall. Okay.
So there's also the question about privacy, but I don't believe we have balconies for the most part we wouldn't put balconies on the side yard anyway. Obviously it's an inner city development, so proximity of balconies, even within the Cocoa courtyard, there's close proximity of balconies. And, you know, we always do our best to try to, you know, mitigate even between balcony users with privacy screens. And there's obviously, you know, requirements in the bylaw that, you know, make sure we have privacy within our design. And I'm sure they're probably talking about overlooking, but again, we're not really proposing any balconies on the that will be the east side of our development, facing the west side of Cocoa. So
Okay. We had one question about clarity of whether that was 8 meters or 8 to 10 feet. I think she's speaking about this.
That will be the east setback between the proposed building and Cocoa, and Tony mentioned 8 to 10 feet, so approximately 3 meters, 10 feet.
3 meters, perfect. I have another question with regards to the courtyard. How can you keep it safe in the back alley if it's open without fencing and making it only for residents?
If you could flip to slide, I think it's 5, the massing, please, Jennifer, just to help illustrate things a little bit. I'll start and then maybe someone else wants to pick up. Yes, that one, thank you. So at this stage, we are aware of security and privacy considerations for this courtyard. So at the moment, at this stage of design, we are proposing some form of fencing along that line. So it's not fully open quite as it, obviously this is quite a simple diagram, as you can see, but we will be proposing some form of privacy and security for that courtyard to manage the use of it from the laneway.
But so Tony, like one of the questions, it's a great question. I mean, typically it's very easy for us to put, you know, I don't know, a 4-foot fence along that area, right? Because are we stepping down maybe 2 or 3 steps into that courtyard space?
Yeah, Delicia's definitely more intimate with the details of that edge, because there is a drop off. You're right, because that lane varies so much in terms of grade. There's a grade difference in some of it, and then it kind of flattens out as we get towards the ramp that goes to the parking. But there's certainly just a definition, a kind of an acknowledgement that this is kind of semi-private area and this is the lane, will definitely be defined somewhat by a low boundary. Now, what exactly that is, that's going to come out, get flushed out in the development permit application. But maybe Talisha could weigh in on that a little bit more, if you had anything more to add. Oh, you have to be unmuted by Jen. That was
my apologies.
It's okay. I think you have to unmute.
Go ahead, Talisha.
Thank you. Yeah, Tony's right. The lane grades vary. So actually, there's only going to be 2 points of access to our building where the grade meets our courtyard, and they'll be connected to our egress doors. And like the design is yet to be fleshed out. We have some concepts for our landscaping, but essentially we'll have to have like a small retaining wall or curb along the back, and then fences. There's also the community gardens and other landscaping elements proposed, but essentially there'll only be 2 points of access, and they will be like emergency access. You can exit out, but they won't have access in unless you, like this will get flushed out more, but it'll be controlled access to the courtyard.
Yeah, and important to note as well, I hope I'm not muted. Yeah, it's important to note as well that that courtyard is going to have a lot of eyes on it in terms of like the development itself. It's really engaged by grade-oriented units with their own sort of private patios. So there's really a nice sense that you're not alone, even if you are alone in that courtyard, that, you know, it's a communal space. And yeah, I think it's going to be programmed enough that it'll be used, as opposed to just providing green space. And then here in Nevada, we've got a pet area, a pet walk area, right? There's also an outdoor gathering area that you can have actual functions. So we're hoping that the programming itself makes it busier as well, which also adds to the security of it.
Tony, there was a follow-up comment from this same person who had posed this question. They just wanted to comment that there's a lot of homelessness and bottle pickers in that alleyway. I don't know if you want to speak to your waste management and where it's going to be stored and if it'll be available to people passing by.
That's a good question. We have enclosed waste and recycling. And so the waste and recycling will only come out, and Naz, correct me if I'm wrong, but it will only come out of the enclosure at the day of pickup, correct? So that'll have to be a sort of a protocol thing with waste and recycling for the condo, or not the condo board, but effectively building management. We'll have to minimize the amount of time that those bins are out, or they just have access to the garage door and they get access to it and pull them out unload them, put them back in again. So that's
Yeah.
at least the way I understand most of our developments have been functioning.
Yeah, no, for sure. And Max, do you know of any, or if there's any attendees, has there been any issues with people breaking in and picking up bottles or anything like that at Coco?
Yeah, if any Coco residents are online and would like to share anything on the chat, then please do via Jennifer. I myself, as a Coco resident, I haven't heard of that coming through, but that may well have been sent to the board. I'm just unaware, but personally, I don't think so. At Coco, it is I think would most likely have a very similar condition for this building, where waste and recycling is in a locked room, only accessed by residents or the waste and recycling company. And then kind of as Tony alluded to, they would on pickup day, that's the only time that they're outside of the locked room. So I think it's a pretty secure operation, unless,
Okay.
yeah.
I have, sorry,
The
multiple comments coming in that there have been several break-ins, and it's a rather targeted area at Coco. So to add to the conversation.
For sure. So we're aware definitely of the break-ins in the storage area, you know, the bikes that were stolen, etc. So for sure, great point. I think just on that note, you know, it's probably worthwhile. Something we didn't do at Coco, and we went back and forth on this, is just to have a gated fence or something. I don't know if it's going to help, but because it's easy to jump over, and I think there's some bylaw around ensuring that there's proper egress or access. So I'm not sure. I think we were getting some feedback on that, but Tony, Talisha, I don't know. Like there may be an opportunity, Talisha. I think where you were going is, you know, there should be some sort of control or lock or something like that on a gate access from the lane. So just a quick point there. I think secondly, I don't know if it's worth looking at doing, you know, planting trees along the, you know, the lane edge. I don't know if that helps with privacy towards the back. I don't know. You know, I think there's pros and cons to it, but considering it is the north side shading, will it get the sun? But it does add a nicer feel along the lane edge, more of a residential feel. I don't know if it benefits the neighbors across, what, you know, what the thoughts or feedback would be, but that might be an idea to incorporate or look at in design. Not sure.
Thank you.
Sorry, just
No,
quick,
go ahead.
Jennifer. Maybe Tony and Talisha can help me out. But there's an acronym. There's during the development permit application, the application is reviewed by the police essentially, and they provide security feedback to us for items such as this question. And then also Sarina will take it upon ourselves to have basically a police inspection of the building just prior to occupancy. And within that, they can highlight a few, if there seems to be any security issues that we can address prior to occupancy.
Thanks, Max. I think the acronym you're looking for is SEPTED.
It's SEPTED, that's
But
correct.
don't ask
Thanks,
me what that
Jennifer.
all stands for. I
Yeah.
can't always remember that.
Thank you.
Crime prevention through environmental design.
Nice. Thank you, Tony. You should know that one. On the back alley, we have another question with regards to the parkade entrance being shown in the middle of the alley. It's already pretty narrow. Would it make more sense for it to be closer to 16th Street for the parkade access? Tony, did you want to speak to that?
Here, I'll speak to it. To be honest, we did try to get that ramp because that section they're referring to, closer to 16th, the lane is actually lower, and that's typically where we want to put our ramp. But in order to make the parkade work relative to where the core of the building is, the core of the building needs to be close to the front entrance. And so because the front entrance is off of 16th Street, then our core of the building had to be close to 16th Street. And so now we had a conflict between where we wanted to put the ramp and where we knew the core was. And in underground parkade, You can't have those conflicting. And so unfortunately, we were forced to put the ramp strictly because there's no other way we could make the parkade work in terms of circulation. And we had to put it in the most inconvenient of places in terms of grade, but we don't feel that it's going to impact the sort of the traffic patterns back in the lane. There's certainly, it's not like a true inner city, like one of those older, like in Kensington, at one point we had, I think, a 5 meter wide lane. This is a 6 meter, it's a standard width of lane, enough for two ways of traffic. So even if there is increased traffic, inevitably there will be with 127 stalls, but it shouldn't impact anything as far as the neighbors and getting in and out of their garages.
Okay, that's a good segue into another, at the last session, we did have a question about this as well, but the impact during construction on the alleyway. Naz had spoken about this and about having a transportation approach to that. Did you want to speak to that again?
For sure. There's definitely lots of learnings for us as we build Cocoa and as we're currently building Harrison, for sure. I think our biggest takeaways is, we need to plan better where our trades park. And so right now, it's really just parking on the street wherever, they can find it. And that's definitely one issue. Deliveries and road closures is another issue as well. Those were the two main issues that we found just over the past 3-4 years in building these types of projects. So with respect to the first issue, what we will be doing is we will be working with the Marda Loop Community Association, because there's a fairly decent size lot where the community association is, and so we will be looking to have our trades park in that lot and then walk up the block to the potential site. So I think in that respect, we may be lucky to kind of collect all the cars and from our trades on that lot. So I think that's going to help. The second thing is the road closures, for deliveries. The challenges in working in the inner city is, these are tight sites, and there's not a lot of laydown areas, and they're tight and they're difficult. And so we really just need to put a plan together to be thoughtful and understand, how we're going to work through access and deliveries, and how, and what that road closure could, those road closures look like. One of the things that we learned at Harrison is whenever we do a road closure, we are now giving residents and neighbors at least 3 to 4 days notice, so they're aware on when we will be closing the road or the lane down. So we never did that at Cocoa, and we're doing it at Harrison, and the neighbors are appreciative of that, and we found that good practice. And so we'll definitely continue that practice, but we're also looking for other ideas to kind of make this easier on our neighbors around us. So if there's any suggestions with respect to access and deliveries and how we can make things better, I mean, we're all ears.
Thanks. Have one last question. If people would like to submit more questions, they certainly can. Our last one is about how is the massing handled on the south side of the building? As a 20-meter building is permitted, the transition to 15-meter buildings developed to the east of the redevelopment plan is further pushed to the east and continues the wind tunnel effect from tall buildings to the west. Where does this stop in transition to R2? Is it now assumed that the city will automatically allow 20 meters all the way to 14th Street? That's a big question, sorry.
I'd let Mark answer that.
Yeah,
That would be in the chat.
if Mark or Jerry are available, I know they're online, maybe not via webcam. I'm not sure if they have microphone access, Jennifer, or if you're able
They
to.
do not. They would be attendees. They can answer in the chat. And of course, for policy, you can always speak to the city by email.
Or Councillor Woolley or Zev, I mean, the city does have a vision for Main Streets, you know, through the guide, or, you know, the guidebook to greater communities. And so, you know, that's a document, or that's something that we look at to see how we can achieve, you know, density in thoughtful ways, particularly on Main Streets. And so, but Mark for sure has can speak to it with more insight than I could, for sure.
Mark is asking me to provide that information to him in the chat, which I can do. That looks like that's the end of our submitted questions. If you give me a moment, I will send that question to Mark and he can answer in the chat.
So for those who may be unaware or unclear, Jared Friedman is the city file manager for the file. So when Naz talks about contacting the city, etc., Jared's the first go-to, and that is jared.friedman@calgary.ca. So Friedman is F-R-I-E-D-M-A-N. So that's where the question that would just came in, a lot of policy, that's a city-related question. And then as developers, we fall under the policy that the city and the vision that they have. So those kind of questions are often best answered by them. And for any other questions as well, policy, city related, Jared's a great resource and a new first point of contact if not myself as well.
Jared has indicated in the chat that he's available by email to answer that question on policy.
And I think, sorry, and Jennifer just shared via chat as well to the whole audience that email address. Thank you, Jennifer.
That seems to be the end of the questions that we have. We'll give everybody a moment if they want to submit any other questions.
Is there, do you know when restrictions lift to do a face-to-face session with neighbors, particularly like with, you know, the DP submission?
I would assume July 1st, all restrictions are lifting.
Essentially, Naz, I think that's the case. Yeah, stage 3, July 1st, fairly open. So from then on, I think
it might be worth. Yeah. Okay. So I think it might be worth doing maybe a different type of face-to-face session with future engagements.
We do have a question with regards to the courtyard being used to accommodate construction laydown, drop-offs and things like that. Is that space available?
Is this space available for like would the within the site on the
Yes.
parcel, would the north side be available for laydown? Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to what we're doing at Harrison right now, where we do have the backside of the building where we are using for laydown within the property for sure. So we'll take laydown wherever we can get it. Yeah, but that's an ideal spot for sure for laydown.
You won't, however, be able to drive any construction vehicles, any large construction vehicles, because I'm pretty sure our structural engineer won't be designing that slab to accommodate that. It's meant to simply accommodate pedestrian traffic and landscaping. So.
Right. Okay.
Excellent. I don't see any more questions have come through at this time, so I think we are done for this session. I do have an invitation, though, if you have questions about the design, materials, landscaping, we will have more discussion, of course, during the development permit. But if anybody has any questions on that, the team is here and able to answer some of those questions for you.
And sorry, just very quickly, Jennifer, as previously, we will be sharing a video of this presentation and the presentation itself, the slides, etc., on our website, where there's also other details of the proposed project, and that is engage1600.ca for those who haven't managed to visit yet. Thank you.